Fred, and thank you for joining our town hall event today. We're going to start with a few pieces of information from your panel of Lori Winters, CEO of Thread, Scott Mastley, CHRO, and Matt Mitcham, COO. Following that, we will begin with our Q&A. A few housekeeping items, and then I'll turn it over. First, please note that you are on mute, but this is an interactive event and we still want to hear from you. So please use the chat function on the right side of your screen to ask questions as you have them. Chat is in moderated mode, so only we can see the questions to protect your privacy. Finally, you'll be receiving a follow-up email with the link to the presentation as well as the slides. Please allow up to 24 hours for that email, and if you still don't receive it, please reach out to me at marketing@threadhcm.com. That's it for me. I'm now turning it over to Lori Winters.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Lori Winters, founder and CEO of Thread, and this is our town hall event. We decided we've been doing some webinars and some videos, and what we decided, so many things are changing so quickly that we wanted to make this a little bit more fluid so that we would give some information out, but leave a lot more time for live questions. So those of you that submitted questions, we're going to hit those first at the end of this, and then we're going to take live questions. So make sure that you chat your questions while we're going, and we'll try to hit as many of those as we can for at least half of this. So we don't want to just give you information that we think is important. We want you guys to kind of run this for us. So if you can hear me, I'd love to see a chat saying for sure that you can, because we all know there's been a lot of little technical glitches here recently. But I am going to. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. All right, so give us a little bit of grace and patience here. We're all live from separate homes. All of our company is remote right now, other than a couple essential people who are in the office producing live paychecks and things like that can't really be done remotely. So, you know, if there's a cat or a dog barking in the distance or a child, one thing I've determined is whether you have an infant, a teenager, or an animal, none of them really are on the same schedule as we are. So without further ado, real quick, here's our agenda. We want to talk about what we feel like are the top 3 things that are important to everybody right now. And then we're going to leave at least half of this open for Q&A. So I'm going to cover, credits, deferrals, and loans. Oh my, there's so many things going on. I'm going to do a quick comparison of some of the things that are out there, a little bit on the new tax deferral guidance that just came out on Friday. And then PPP, now what? So best practices if you are getting a PPP, paycheck provider or paycheck protection loan, and also a little bit out on the loan forgiveness calculation. Scott, our chief HR officer, is going to handle a little bit on the HR side, unemployment insurance, sick leave, and the emergency FMLA, just quick guidance on that. And Matt, who runs the inside of the business, our COO, is going to handle a little bit about our software setup and how we're handling that for those of you that are current clients of ours. So quickly, I'm going to touch on this briefly, but you guys are going to get a copy of this if you want it. These are all the different things that are kind of going around right now, and everybody's asking us questions. Which ones can we do together? Which ones are exclusive of the other? So I put a quick little slide together on this, the Paycheck Protection Program, and what you also know of as the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, the EIDL loans. Both of these are through the SBA. And just one thing I wanted to get out, if you apply for an EIDL loan, you are able to get $10,000 access of emergency cash. And even if you're denied that loan, you do not have to pay that $10,000 back. If you did apply for an EIDL loan and you got the $10,000, you will have to roll that into the PPP. But they are not exclusive. You can do both. You can apply for both of these. One thing to note, though, is that the EIDL loan does have to be paid back, other than the $10,000 if you get denied. The PPP obviously has a forgiveness piece to it. You cannot use both for the same purposes. So if you're using the PPP to pay rent or mortgage, you cannot use the EIDL loan to pay the same thing. So they need to be paying different things. Real quickly on the employer tax deferral, there's new guidance that came out. I'm going to hit on that a little bit more in the next slide, so I'm going to cross over that. The emergency paid sick leave and the emergency paid FMLA. So the only thing I want to touch on that, we've gone into those in a lot of detail, but you can still apply for the PPP if you are having to pay the emergency paid sick or FMLA. You just can't use those pieces because it's a credit against 941s. That piece cannot be used to calculate your total payroll calculation, but you can do both. And then just quickly, employee retention credit. I did a video on this last week. It kind of is a new thing that everybody's starting to think about. Cannot be used with the PPP. So I'm going to send more. You can ask more questions on this, and I will go into more detail. Employer Social Security tax deferral. Originally, you could not do that and have the PPP loan. New guidance came out. It keeps happening, right? It's government makes a decision on this, which I'm glad has happened really fast, but then details start having to be worked out. So on Friday, the 10th, there was some new guidance that came out that said you can take this tax deferral, even if you applied for a PP loan and you get it, but you can only defer the employer Social Security tax, that's 6.2, up until the time your lender has granted forgiveness. So that's important to understand. Employers will submit a form at the end of the 8 weeks where you're using the PPP loan. At the end of that 8 weeks, you're going to submit a form to your lender, and the lender will make a forgiveness decision. Once they make a decision, then you can no longer defer any more of the employer tax that's happening from that point on. But what's important to know is that Social Security tax that you did defer, so at a minimum, you probably have 2 months to defer that. Then you'll have to pay 50% of that by the end of 2021 and 50% of that by the end of 2022. So same rules on when it's due. But that's new. It used to be that you couldn't do both. Now you can up to a point. Okay, quickly. PPP, everybody's applying for these, or a lot of people are. There's some clients, some customers, some employers out there that it's not the best option for them. But for those that are applying for the PPP, there's some guidance out there on best practices I wanted to kind of throw out. One, make sure you have a payroll service. Whether you're our client or someone else's, it doesn't matter. Just make sure that you have one. It's a very inexpensive way, for the most part, to make sure you're keeping really, really good track of payroll from the point that you get this loan. It's really important. Use or make sure you already have a CPA that can also help you with record keeping. This is something that has been sent down as none of this is required, but it's just best practice. Keep your PPP funds when you do get them. And I have heard there are some companies out there that are getting the funding now. A lot have been approved. The funding is coming, slowly, but it is happening. Keep that money in a separate account. That way you can really do a good job of accounting for it, because we all want to get prepared to make sure we get the maximum forgiveness. And then be obsessive, track everything. Payroll, check registers, health insurance invoices, rent, mortgage, and keep it in a separate account. That way you'll be able to account for it. And, when you do submit the form for forgiveness, you're going to have all the records that you need. This is a little complicated, of course. I'm going to quickly go over it, and then I'm going to do an example. And then I'm going to hand it off to Scott to talk a little bit about unemployment insurance and HR items. But on the PPP loan forgiveness, and remember, some of this may change a little bit. There's room in the language of the actual CARES Act for some interpretation. So I think some of this could change, but some of this is solid. So the forgiven portion has to be spent within the 8 weeks from funding. So know that you can't just keep the money and put it aside for a later time if you want forgiveness. So that has to be spent within 8 weeks. 75% must be spent on payroll costs. Only 25% can be spent on rent, mortgage, utilities, qualified expenses. Forgiveness, the lender is going to help you determine which piece of this what percentage is going to be forgiven and what percentage will become a loan. So there are there's a calculator that I've been looking at and helping to create for myself, but you're going to reduce the forgiveness by a couple things. One is the amount of money spent on qualified non-payroll expenses that exceeds 25% of the loan amount. So if your mortgage and rent payments exceed 25%, that piece of it will be reduced. Amount of money spent on non-qualified expenses. So if you spent any of this on anything other than payroll and qualified expenses, that will be reduced. The reduction in headcount. So there's calculation, your average number of full-time equivalent employees during the 8 weeks following funding divided by one or two of these options, either average full-time equivalent from February 15th, 2019 through June 30th, 2019, or your average full-time equivalent from January through February of 2020. You divide those two, and that's going to determine a percentage of reduction in headcount. You're also going to get, if you reduce wages, so say you did an across-the-board reduction in wages, anyone earning less than $100,000 is what they care about. So that reduction in wage will also go into the calculation. You have until June 30th, 2020 to rehire anyone back and to increase salary or wages back to what they were prior. You have until June 30 to make those changes. Here's a quick example, and I'd be glad to help people with calculating some of this I'll do the best I can anyway. Say your PPP loan was $500,000 and you used the amount that you used over and above the 25% that can be used for other authorized purposes, rent, mortgage, and that type thing. In this example, $50,000 was over and above that 25%. The amount of the PPP loan not used for authorized purposes, so obviously that's not going to be forgiven. In this example, $10,000, that was just a random number. So the subtotal in this example is $440,000. Now you've got to look at the reduction that you've had in headcount. So I made this example a 25% reduction in headcount equated to $110,000 taken off of the $440,000 that you will not get forgiven. And then there's a worksheet that I've seen. I'd be glad to share it. It's a per employee worksheet that shows reduction in salary. So this is just an example. Overall reduction in salaries was $12,000 for that time period. So the amount of the loan forgiven would be $318,000. We've got a lot. There's quite a few calculators that I found and have tweaked a little bit. So I'd be glad to share those with anybody that's interested. But just my point here is just make sure you're doing all the right things to increase the total maximum forgiven amount of the loan. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Scott. Scott is going to talk a little bit more on the unemployment insurance piece, and then we'll move on to that. Scott?
Thanks, Lori. I appreciate it. So I just want to hit some of the main questions I'm getting out of the gate, and that way if you have additional questions after that, you can hit them in the Q&A session, and we'll be glad to answer those as best as we can. So number one is filing for employees. Are we required to file for employees? And yes, in Georgia is the only state that we're aware of that is requiring employers to file on their employees' behalf. Some of the other states are requesting it, but Georgia is requiring it. And even though they're calling it a partial filing for unemployment, you file it when people have a reduction in pay, and that can be salaried and hourly people. So if you reduce their hours, reduce their pay rates, anything like that, if they're making less than they were making before due to COVID-19, then you would add them to the spreadsheet and file the claim on their behalf. You would not give them a separation notice or have them file individually. The only time that people will have to file their own claims as W-2 employees is if they quit their job or you have worked for them, but they're refusing to come in and do it. Then in that case, they might file their own claim directly on the site and go from there. Another question that comes up based on that is, will those claims count against me? If you're filing claims on behalf of your employees, then those claims should not affect your unemployment rates or anything like that. Only claims that employees file directly might affect your rates, as those would be handled in a traditional way. Second thing is the $600, which is the FPUC. You may have seen that, the Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation. There's a lot of acronyms going around, so I'll spare you from some of those. But basically that's the $600 that you've heard about from the federal government. And according to Georgia, anybody who's eligible for $1 in state benefits is eligible to get this $600. The question we have not had answered relative to that is, what if someone has been denied benefits at the state level and they're saying they're not eligible? Are they then still eligible for the $600 from the federal government? That is yet to be determined. But they did announce that the $600 will start week ending April 4th, meaning those payments should be added to state benefit payments this week. So we'll see how that goes. They're announcing that, but we'll see if it actually happens. Also, under this federal assistance, they have extended benefits. That's another acronym where once employees have completed their state allotment of benefits, and it varies state by state, but for most states, it's up to 26 weeks, can be a little bit less. And then the $600 is 16 of those weeks. So if they're eligible and they continue to get paid, it's for 16 weeks, they can get that $600, or through July 30th, the end of July, that would end. But you don't have to do anything to trigger the federal $600. When you file for the state, that automatically triggers that claim for the $600 as well. If people do get that check and they say, wait a minute, it was less than $600, then it's probably because they elected to have taxes taken out, and that would be 10% federal taxes, 6% state taxes, or it could be that they have a garnishment or child support order that's coming out of that money as well. I don't know how the Department of Labor will know who has garnishments and child supports relative to unemployment payments, but that's to be determined as well. But they're saying if it's less, it's one of those two reasons. So extended benefits, if it goes beyond 26 weeks, what is supposed to happen is the states will identify people who are eligible for the additional 13 weeks and will send them filing instructions just to basically confirm that they're still unemployed for certain reasons and still eligible for benefits, so they can keep those going. They will, and then for C, self-employed, 1099, independent contractors, church and nonprofit employees. What the states have said is they are eligible to apply for unemployment. They will apply directly. They will not be added on the spreadsheet in Georgia when the employer is filing partial claims. So self-employed individuals, independent contractors, 1099, churches, nonprofit employees will file their own claims. And what happens is if they are found ineligible first, for whatever reason under a traditional claim, then this pandemic unemployment assistance, which is part of the federal assistance, will kick in. They're saying that those folks, after they apply, will get an answer within 21 days. I know that's a long time, but that's what's out there right now. And saying that they will start to get emails around April 22nd. That's when those are supposed to start notifying those folks with a link where they can answer certain questions about their eligibility for benefits. So that's going to be a longer process than it is for regular W-2 employees, but that's how they've got it set up. And then last big question about owners and W-2s. If you are an owner of a business, then you can apply for unemployment based on the pay that you received through payroll. So if you were on a W-2, the salary through payroll, then you can apply for unemployment. But if you were not paying yourself through a W-2 at all, then you typically would not be eligible for unemployment. All right, so those are some of the basics.
All right, we're going to turn this over to Matt. Matt's going to just talk just a couple minutes. We've got a good number of clients on here. We may have some that are not, and that's fine either way, but wanted to just give a quick update. And if you're not a current client, just make sure your provider is keeping you updated with all this fun stuff.
Thank you, Lori. Absolutely. Well, I think we're in a season where I think it's never felt more like taking a sip from a fire hose than we have right now. I'm sure your inboxes have been blown up with COVID information. One of the key pieces for our team that we've been trying to do is to stand in front of that fire hose and consume as much as we possibly can to simplify it for you. So hopefully these weekly webinars have been helping with that. And our support team has been getting educated because obviously, as you guys know, this is a moving target. But the one thing I want to assure you right now, for those that are our clients on their call, is thank you for letting us help navigate this through with you. And I want to let you know that iSolved now is fully coded and ready to handle these relief options that you select. And so we know many of you are in the process of the PPP loan, or waiting funding, or trying to finalize the application. I know that we helped a tremendous amount of our clients last week and the week before in getting the data ready. So if you still are looking for assistance or need that, I want to encourage you to reach out to your account manager to help you grab any data that you need. But the one area that I did want to tell you is we are now currently working on weekly releases, because as you guys know, it's a moving target. With the new guidance that was released on Friday from the iSolved, we know many of you may choose to defer your employer taxes while you're in the process of the PPP loan. As Lori mentioned before, that was not an option as of Friday. So we do believe that there's going to be many of you clients trying to preserve as much cash flow as possible during this time. That we are ready and the system is ready to manage that for you. So as far as specific instructions that I want to tell you, one, to assure you is that we got you, and our developers are working around the clock right now. We are doing weekly interim releases. As soon as new guidance is consumed or released from the IRS, our team is coding them, and then usually with a release within a day or two after that. So for the next step that we want to tell you is, one, as Lori was telling you, is to choose. If many of you are working with your CPAs, your bankers, your attorneys, to figure out which is the right option for you. And once you have selected which of these relief packages you are going to go with, the next step that we're simply asking you to do is to reach out to your account manager with the option that you're choosing. And our team is going to be sending out a kind of a client acknowledgement form so that we have some signature of what's going to be happening. And then we are going to be configuring one-on-one with you and your team of how to train and set this up to help. We realize this is a lot, so it's very tough to do this on a webinar with all the setups, because each person has nuances and questions. So, one of the reasons a lot of you guys have chosen Thread on the first place has been a lot of our hand-holding, and we want to continue that through this as well. So again, our simple instructions are reach out to your account manager with your team, or to me. We will be setting up almost what we're doing here, just a screen share. We will set up and configure your account for those options. And then from there, you can then move forward, and we'll show you what needs to happen after that. So the last thing I was going to say on, Lori, I'm going to go back up to your option here. The one option that I do want to make sure that was available for the team is under this emergency paid sick leave and emergency paid FMLA. We do have several clients that have been offering this. And if you can remember, this is something that started on 4/1 for anybody that you have offered emergency paid sick leave. That does require having a new earnings code set up in your environment. So if many of you have already set this up, if you are going to be offering that, to please reach out to your account managers so that we can add that code to your environment to make sure that when we are putting hours and wages against this, that they're getting applied to the right code. So outside of that, I'm going to leave it open. I'm sure we will have some questions. We'll try to keep it pretty general just for confidentiality purposes. But again, we encourage you to reach out to your account manager, and we will help navigate this craziness with you. Thanks so much.
Awesome. So now, thanks, Matt. We're going to open this up. We're going to have Barb moderate for us. And I want Barb to start with the questions that were already submitted. And we will do our best to answer those now. And then we're going to answer what's been submitted in the chat. So Barb, kick us off.
All right. So Tiara asked, should employers defer the 6.2% Social Security employer tax if they applied for the PPP loan but have not heard back from the bank? Is it possible to defer now, and then once the employer's heard back, then the employer portion of the payroll tax is then paid?
Yeah, so that was the new guidance that I touched on a few minutes ago, which is, yes, you can do both now. And that just happened as of April 10th, which was Friday. And so you can do both up until the point that your loan has been forgiven. So at least for the 8 weeks that you are using the funding, the loan, the PPP funding, you can be deferring your employer tax, your employer Social Security tax. And you can continue to do so until you submit your form to your lender, the forgiveness request form. And then when a decision is made on what piece of it is forgiven, then you can't defer anymore. But you can defer that piece of it just like you would the other, the regular deferral, which would be half of that accumulated would be due 50% end of 2021 and 50% end of 2022.
Awesome. Julie asked, interested to know more about the CARES Act and EIDL and finding out how an independent contractor files for unemployment. I think this is a Scott and Lori question, both.
Yeah, so we touched on that a little bit before. In fact, we looked at a lot of these questions to decide what we wanted to talk about. So thank you for submitting them. You can do the EIDL loan and the PPP at the same time. You can't use them for the same purposes. So if you're using the PPP loan, you would use that for payroll, rent, mortgage, utilities, and then you would use the EIDL loan for other purposes. But you can do both.
Yeah, Scott, to add on to that about the 1099 is they will file their own claim directly through the, depending on what state you're in, but if you're in Georgia, it's dol.georgia.gov, and they would file a claim just like traditionally employees would file an unemployment claim, and they'll have to answer some questions, probably provide a copy of their 1099, maybe their driver's license, social, that kind of stuff. And then once they're found ineligible for regular unemployment insurance, then they'd have to wait for the email that gives them instructions on how to continue the claim. They don't have to file another claim later on, but they will continue the claim. Now, a related question that I've seen on that is, what if we included 1099 people on our company spreadsheet when we were filing for employees? So you would not want to include 1099s on your spreadsheet for filing on behalf of the employees. That's for your W-2 employees, and your 1099s would file directly on their own through the state, but their process is just going to take a little longer than normal.
One thing I want to add on that, Scott, is if you have 1099 employees, make sure that you let them know that they are now, as of April 10th, self-employed people are now able to apply for the PPP loan. They have to, there's some different guidelines on how they apply, but it opened up on this past Friday for self-employed people to apply for these loans as well. So that's also a way they may be able to get quicker funding.
Yeah.
Okay, Barb.
Melinda has a few questions here. How long is it estimated to get the PPP loan money from the date they turn in their application? What do we tell employees who have still not received their state unemployment pay when there shouldn't be any issue? Is there anything employers can do for 1099s that are no longer working for them? When is the federal $600 per week expected to start? How is it coming in? And is the government giving the state governments the money to pay through their system?
Okay, that's a lot of questions. Let me see if what was the first? The first question was,
how long is it estimated to get the PPP?
Oh, okay. If I had that answer right now, I would be a wealthy person. Good question. I've got friends in the banking industry, and they're saying that they are funding loans. There have been loans that have been funded. There have been a lot of loans that have been approved through the SBA. The funding is happening a little at a time. Supposedly there's a decent backlog, which we can all imagine. So I don't know the answer to that. I do know a couple people that are peers of mine that have received funding. So it is happening. It's just happening slowly. I applied for us on the day that it opened up, April 3rd, I think it was. And I have a loan number. I have an approval, but we do not have the funding yet either. So I think it's going to take a little bit of time. But the key is getting that, if you ask your lender, once you get an SBA, it's called an E-Tran number, E-T-R-A-N. That SBA E-Tran number has earmarked your company and that amount as part of that $300+ billion package. So that's the key to knowing that you've been approved, and then the funding will follow that.
Okay. So Todd had just asked that as well. Do you know anyone who's actually received the money into their account? And we had another commenter, Trudy, who said she applied through a community bank, was approved last Monday, loan documents today, and are being funded Wednesday. So
it depends on the financial institution. Some have gotten ahead of it. I think after this, we're going to all decide who we're going to bank with based on how quickly they were able to deal with this. But I've heard it's less than 2% have been funded. So it's coming, but it's coming kind of slowly. What was the next question on that, Barb?
Melinda also asked, what do we tell employees who have still not received their state unemployment pay when there shouldn't be any issues?
There is There's a link that we can send out. It's actually on the dol.georgia.gov. If you go to the unemployment section of that website, there's a link that says it kind of has a breakdown where it says employer and employee, and you go into the employee section and it says click here to check claim status. And employees can go directly in, enter their PIN number that they originally got when they started their claim, and they can check on the status of their claim anytime if they want to see what's happening with payment or anything like that. I know that all of the state unemployment services are pretty swamped, just like everybody else. I think right now it's anybody who is working hard, and that's the general rule across the board right now. And we haven't been able to get through on the phone with them or emails for a couple of days because they're really, really busy. So things are taking longer than you would expect. But I would give them the link and tell them to follow up directly on that. In terms of your question with 1099s, Melinda, and I appreciate y'all being on here. Melinda is a Thread engaged client taking advantage of our HR services. So we really appreciate that, and I hope it's been helpful. For the 1099s, like Lori was saying, they have a couple options. They can apply for unemployment. They can apply for a PPP loan. So they have two. Those are the two main options I would say that they have there to keep going. Another question that popped up I see is, what if I get funded through the PPP? I want to bring people back to work and pay them. Do I notify the state of Georgia? And that's along the lines of several other questions we've gotten relative to what happens if an employee, what happens if I'm ready to bring an employee back to work and I call Scott and I go, Scott, I'm ready for you to come back to work. Your job's here. And Scott says, dude, I'm making pretty good money on unemployment. I don't think I'm coming back for a while. Well, that is a realistic expectation. Sometimes I think some employees will self-select in that way. But what you do as an employer is, if you have the job, you have the money, and employees are just choosing not to come back because they want to stay on unemployment, then what you do is you go to the Department of Labor site. You actually click on the fraud section of the site, and then there's an option under there that says job refusal. So you are notifying the state that we have a job for the employee, but the employee is refusing to do it. You would also remove that employee from your weekly filing of unemployment if you're still continuing to file.
Awesome. And that question is thanks to Mike. One last one from Melinda. When is the federal $600 per week expected to start being received?
So in Georgia, they said that is going to start on April 13th. So any day. We'll see. I've asked people who are on unemployment if they've seen that $600 yet, and I haven't talked to anybody who's seen it yet, but it's supposed to start.
Gotcha.
On the 13th.
Lori, question for you. Michael asks, is the government going to void payroll taxes for the remainder of 2020? This would be the quickest way to put money into the economy.
I don't think that's the case. Sounds good.
Yeah.
But no, I think what they're doing right now is, I see where you're coming from, and I do think what they've done is allowed the FMLA and the emergency sick leave to go against federal taxes, so you can use that money as a credit to fund those payments. So you are using the tax money to pay those people. The other thing, the employee retention credit, that fits a handful of situations, and in that case, you're taking a credit up to 50% of a worker's income up to $5,000 per employee, and that is against income tax, or that's against the federal employer tax, Social Security tax as well. So they are trying to use that piece up, and then now that you can do the employer Social Security tax deferral until you have a loan forgiveness decision. That's all I know of right now. There is I can send a document out. I've got a pretty good document that shows state by state some of the different things the states are doing. So of course they're all going to do something different, which makes our lives a little more challenging, but it makes everybody's life more challenging. But I can get that attached to this and send it out.
Awesome. Okay, we have a multi-part question from Kathleen. Scott, I think they're probably all going to go to you.
Okay.
One, do employees have to claim weekly benefits in the system since the company is filing for them?
No, the employees don't have to do anything in Georgia. Now, in other states, employees will be filing their own claims. But in Georgia, once the employer files the claim, the employee doesn't do anything. Even if, let's say, so in Georgia, I saw a couple questions along these lines, so I'll just hit them all while we're on it. One was, do we file every week? And you do file every week in Georgia. The employer files the spreadsheet. Even if your pay period is biweekly, semi-monthly, it doesn't matter. They still want you to file every single week because they want to determine the benefits eligibility and the amount and pay those weekly to get money in people's hands. That's the idea. If you had an employee who went ahead and got antsy and filed a claim directly before you filed the company spreadsheet on their behalf, the partial claim, then the Department of Labor has told me that they don't need to do anything else, that the employer claim will take precedence. And I understand we have a few clients who had that situation where the employees have not been paid yet, and they're saying, how long is this going to take? So I think what happened is you have two different claims going in there. It's going to take them a little while to figure out which one is which. So I think they will get paid, but it's probably going to be a delay along with that if there are multiple claims filed. Did that answer the question?
We hope so.
I hope so.
Okay.
Chat us back if we didn't.
Chat us back
Yeah,
if
right.
clarification.
All right. Let's see.
I
Lori.
see someone else is asking about a list, a state-by-state list, and we can send you kind of a sheet that has some links to the different states.
Yeah, we'll provide that in the follow-up email.
Right.
Lori, question for you from Kevin. My primary question is understanding the intersections and the mutually exclusive elements of the SBA PPP options for employers and the CARES Act provisions and options for employers. Seems in some provisions, if you do one, you can't do the other. I feel like you kind of covered this a little bit.
Yeah, I think that in the slides that you get, that chart that I put together, I attempted to do as much as I could on that. The PPP and the idle loan you can do together. There's some, caveats on what you spend the money on. The employer tax deferral, I think I've killed that enough here. You can do both until the lender approves forgiveness. And then the paid sick leave and emergency paid FMLA, you can do both. You can do that with the PPP loan as well. But the part of your wages that are being paid for those cannot be used in the calculation of payroll. And then the employee retention credit cannot be used with the PPP. So I hope that answers. I'd be glad to be more specific if I can be.
Scott, question for you. Shannon asks, can we push folks to go on disability who should be in order to ease payroll requirements?
You really only have people file for disability normally when they're unable to work due to their own condition. And because of the coronavirus being so, it's not like a chronic condition. Most people who have been infected with it are okay within a week. And I know not everybody is, but most, I think it's over 80-something% of the people who get it are fine within a few days. So most of those folks would not qualify for disability, even if they applied for it. And even if they could, you still have to check the plan documents for your specific disability insurance to make sure it would cover something like that. So the odds of them getting disability are not real high in this situation. Most disability plans have a certain waiting period as well, and you might not be able to satisfy those requirements either. So your options are, if people are unable to work and they're quarantined or they're sick or they're taking care of somebody or they're unable to work because of childcare, then they do have those options under the Families First Act for the emergency paid sick leave up to 80 hours. And then beyond that, the only reason that anyone would be qualified for the expanded FMLA, the paid FMLA, which is up to $200 per day, is if you cannot work or telework because of childcare obligations or requirements, because your childcare institution or person is unavailable. They've clarified that that can be a nanny, a grandpa, a neighbor, anybody who normally takes care of your kids. If that person's not available, which they're probably not because they're sheltering somewhere or the schools are closed or whatever, that's what that would be used for. But if they're able to work and you have work for them, then they would normally not be qualified for that expanded FMLA leave. Some other clarification that recently came out for that under the emergency paid sick leave under the Families First Act is that you don't have to require a doctor's note or proof that a school closed. You just need to receive the form from the employer requesting the leave. And we have sample forms for that. If you're not a client of ours, please reach out to us and we can share a sample form with you. We've already sent those to our clients.
That's great.
Thanks, Scott. Lori, question from Rami. What happens if you get approved for PPP and then afterwards you hear you're approved for the SBA loan as well?
That's okay. You can have both. The decision will be whether if you got the $10,000 emergency cash that you can get through the regular EIDL SBA, you will roll that piece into the PPP, but you can have both, and they just can't be used for the same expenses. So again, making sure you keep really good records and keep really good track of where everything is going, I think is the most important thing here.
Gotcha. Scott, Kelly just chatted in regarding employer filing unemployment for employees in Georgia. Do we have to file at the point the change is made to a lower compensation amount? In other words, before at the regular pay period would have ended and pay would be received by the employee, or at the date the change becomes effective / begins?
Sure. Good question. What you're supposed to do is file at the end of the first reduced pay period. Now, I know that can be a little confusing because don't think of pay period as your normal pay period, right? So let's say you normally pay biweekly, and you furloughed some employees after the first week of that biweekly pay period. So they would be paid in full through that first week. But the second week of that biweekly pay period, they would not get any pay, or they would get reduced pay. So you would file for the unemployment at the end of that second week. So on the spreadsheet, it asks for your WED, week ending date, and you just put the date of the first week where those employees had reduced pay. And you file at the end of that week. If you file during the week, it will kick out the spreadsheet. So you just want to wait till that 1 week pay period. So think of pay period as 1 week for unemployment purposes, regardless of what your normal pay schedule is. And you want to file at the end of the first reduced pay period.
Simple. Simple.
So easy. Super easy.
Kara asks, for companies with less than 15 employees, can the employers still file for unemployment insurance benefits for employees, especially since EEs may not have received benefits after filing on an individual basis?
The answer to every question that starts with, should I file, that I've asked the Department of Labor, they've said, yes, file. Throw them on there, see what happens. So as long as they're W-2 employees and they're making less than they were making before due to anything related to COVID-19, then you could probably add them to your spreadsheet and see what happens. Now, if they've already filed individually and got a determination letter that says they're not eligible, I think you could still file on their behalf. And if anybody said, why did you do that way down the road, which I doubt that'll ever happen, you could just say, look, they jumped the gun a little bit, and then we realized that we were supposed to be doing this. So we put them on our spreadsheet to make sure we were meeting our obligation, because the penalty for an employer of not filing, and I have heard of several companies who've just said, we're not going to file for our employees. That could be a mistake, because what they're saying is the penalty is that you will be responsible for the full amount of all the unemployment payments that are made to your employees or former employees if they catch you.
Yeah, Scott, can you touch on that a little bit? I've had questions asked on from some people recently about unemployment insurance and rates going up when you're because employers are always worried about their rates going up.
Yeah.
When they're having to pay out a lot of unemployment. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so every state has different language about this, but basically the directive from the federal government during this pandemic is that people who are collecting unemployment due to this situation should not affect any employer rates or anything like that. So any of these extended benefits, so the extended time and the extra money, that $600, all of that is being funded by the federal government right now. They're not hitting the states up for that yet. And I say yet because I don't know if they will or not, but we'll see how that works out. But it is not supposed to have any effect on your rates at all. The only thing that could affect employer unemployment rates would be if employees file direct unemployment claims in the traditional sense. Let's say they quit their job and they file their own claim, then that could affect your rates. But typically when people quit their job, they're usually not eligible for unemployment. So it shouldn't be something you have to worry about. There's a little bit of gray area in this, along with everything else related to the pandemic and its legislation, because there's about 5 different ways to look at what is a refusal to work? What does it mean? What if somebody says, well, I quit because I didn't feel safe coming to work, right? Which is going to be something we're going to hear more and more of is, well, it's not that I don't like my job. It's just that I don't feel safe. So employers have got to do a good job of presenting the case that we're following CDC guidance and we're doing everything we can to be, as safe as possible, and to talk to employees about when it's appropriate to come back to work or not.
Thanks, Scott.
Sure.
Lori, Mike wants to know, after applying for PPP, what's next? Where do we go from here?
We hound our lender every day, twice a day. That's what I've done. There's so many out there right now. There's some real truth to that, because if you've got a relationship with your banker, with your lender, they are inundated right now. And I know that, in a very respectful way, being not the squeaky wheel and obnoxiously, but continuing to let them know you're really important to them. And, just following up with them, I think, is so important to make sure that they continue to put you toward the front. I just think the lenders are inundated with so many applications. And then again, like what I was saying, as far as the best practice, is just make sure that especially once you know that you're approved for this, open up another account. And when you do get the funding, put it in a separate account. That way you can account for every single thing that goes in and out. I know that it's going to be very important that we have all of our T's crossed and I's dotted, and we will help you guys with that. But when we have to go fill the form out and apply for forgiveness, it's important to keep all those funds separate. Also, I just saw in here, Scott, Donna was saying, is that Georgia only, right? And I think that she was asking about the filing for employees. No matter what, you should always file for them. So all the different states have different, they're all doing something a little bit different. And I did mention I saw another question on here. You'd appreciate an answer appreciate that report that shows by state, and we'll get that out to you guys, because there's some really good resources out on what the states are doing.
Molly. Scott, question from Alondia. How should a company handle pushing back start dates for new employees during this time? Scott, I think you might be muted.
So new hires, pushing out start dates. Can't hear him.
Scott, yeah, okay.
You go to the next question. We'll come back to that one.
Yeah, let's see. Lori. I just have one for you and I scrolled past it. Oh, here we go. Todd, one of our employees that are filing for unemployment got a temp job. So I did not file a claim for him when he started working. Should I have done something more? That seems like a Scott question too. Scott, are you with us?
Hold on, let me read. They were filing unemployment for a temp job. So I just did not file a claim for him when he started working. Should I have done something more than just not file a claim for him, like notified Georgia? That's definitely a Scott question. I'm not going to answer. I know better than to answer something that I don't know the answer to exactly. Oh, there he is.
No, you're still muted, Scott.
I'm gonna attempt as a business owner on the employee start date, because we had that happen with us. And when this thing first happened, we had an employee that was supposed to start right away, and the way we handled that is we contacted the employee who was supposed to start and just worked out a specific arrangement with him on pushing out the start date a few weeks. And for him, it was fine. As far as, I don't know what the specific situation is, and from a HR legal perspective, maybe Scott can chime in on that. But if we have him back, I don't know.
I just asked him to dial in if he can't get unmuted.
He's trying to dial in.
And Lori, I on that question too, I've talked to a couple of business owners as well, and a lot of it, I would say, really comes back down to your infrastructure. Like if you have the ability to do remote, we have several clients that have actually started doing remote onboarding by employees, so they have the ability to do kind of a learning management system like we have iSolved Learn. And again, it just really comes down to your technology infrastructure of delaying that versus you have the ability to onboard them remotely.
Right.
Matt,
Yeah.
while I'm here, how have you been working with managing remote teams?
That has been a tough thing. A lot of this, as you guys have probably known, if you're trying to figure out Zoom while also being remote, that creates a bit of a challenge. For us, we've used kind of Ring Central and Zoom. And then for those that have used like Slack or a chat type channels, those have been indispensable for us during this time. People have heard of Slack.com. They've been around forever. Think of it as like an instant messaging, but with channels for your different teams and for your different groups. We've used a version of that called Teamwork Chat, which has allowed our team to be connected in a way like never before. And then for us, and Lori has done, this has been a very, very helpful thing, is we have started every week with a State of the Union for the company. So we do have the ability for video. Every single person, we're fortunate, has a laptop and has had the technology infrastructure for that. But between 8:30 and 9 every Monday, we start our meetings and our week off that way. So as you guys know, it's constantly changing. So it allows Lori to be able to speak to the team about the changes for the week. And then we also successfully had our first or second virtual happy hour at 4 o'clock on Friday, which has been a way to maintain a little bit of the culture and our sanity. So just a couple tips there. I don't know if anything else, Laura, you'd add to that.
Yeah, I think for companies that aren't used to being remote, it's a challenge. We tested this out a while ago, so we had it prepared before this happened because of snowstorms and ice storms. We're in the South, so ice storms tend to hit us pretty hard. We don't know how to handle them down in the South. But so we had already really tested out our whole team being remote. But the things that we had not tested out were the things needed to keep our team together. Culture is so important to our team. So we start out, like Matt said, every Monday morning, 8:30. We do a Zoom meeting video with the whole team. And I run that really just about keeping everybody's spirits up and communication and, making sure that we're all working together. All of our departments do individual departmental Zoom meetings, and we do those once a week. For one-to-ones, we're doing Zoom video meetings, and the chat channels have been great because we have chat channels for the whole team. We have chat channels for departments, and that has been a great way to keep us all together. And if a client, for instance, calls in and needs something that maybe the person that's working with them doesn't have an answer to, they'll chat it out in our chat, and then one of us will pick it up and run with it and to try to help kind of swarm the issue and help our clients out that way.
Yeah. One of our employees is actually on our implementation specialist, Pamela, and she said we can also use our smartphones for all of those meetings too. So it's nice that it's versatile.
Right.
All right. Well, Scott is still trying to get in.
That's okay. It's not perfect. We know that, So what we're going to do is we're going to follow up after this. We're going to send the slides out to everybody. We will send a recording. We'll send a copy of the state information that that I touched on, all the different states, the resource there. And the couple questions, if there were a couple questions for Scott that since he is for some reason unable to, and he doesn't know sign language, so we'll have to follow up on those after the fact. But what we want to do with these is kind of keep these going at least once a week, maybe twice, just to have most of it be Q&A, because I believe more things are going to change. I started to think this past week that things were slowing down, and then new guidance keeps coming out. And I think the next guidance that's going to come out is around loan forgiveness. There are some new loans that are being funded now through the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department that we're going to start talking or hearing a little bit about, called Main Street loans. Those are not forgivable loans, but there's something interesting about those. They're larger amounts, and they're for small to mid-sized companies, but up to 10,000 employees. So I think we're going to do more of these. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. The goal here is for you guys to be able to ask as many questions as possible. So we'll continue to do these until you guys decide you don't want any more info from us. So without further ado, thank you guys for your time. And that's all we've got. And we'll talk next time.
Yeah, and we'll get answers to Todd and Alondia from Scott very soon.
Yep. Hang in there, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.